Well, you weren't supposed to say it before, since I would. Anyway. Um, Sorry, I've had a really hard night. Yeah, just you could tell by the. I don't know why this happened. Ugh. But the 2 replacement other computers will be coming. You know, I'm trying to be honest. I'm trying to like. Why is this hot? Why does this? Is that? Is that fixing the color at all? Stay. Ugh. All right. Whatever. So let me have a sip of this. I've been struggling for a really long time. Everybody knows that. It's very hard when you're on your own. It's very hard to not have family. It's very hard that my mom uh, haven't seen her. I hadn't seen her in like 8 years. She was going to come and help me. I was going through very, very hard time, and then she died and couldn't make it. And you guys know this, but I'm trying to say like, I've needed every penny I could get, and then losing my computer, so they're being replaced. That like we had to pay for, meaning me and you guys. Well, some of you guys. And then Fila's surgery, her being taken away, like the desperation for not just like my survival, but I always put like the survival of my dogs first and what would happen to them. And I say this because that comment last night where I had to stop the stream caused me so much pain. I was unable to eat. Like I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I couldn't even put any milk in my coffee. The cruelty was just so intense. I feel like this guilt put on me where it was he just said like I left you, I left you, I left you, I left you. And you think about trying to get every dollar you can together and take care of your dogs. And I felt it was like, and he's like, oh, you trimmed up, keep it up, because I left you. And it was just like, normally I could go to the fridge because I clean late at night, as I've usually been, stressing with the car, had to be up, get the car taken care of this morning. Because keep in mind, he said this to me like an hour after I got hit by a car. Anyway, so the car had to be taken. Anyway, so, and I told you the insurance adjuster totally on my side because they saw that their wheel must have caught and ripped off the whole front. But anyway, so I couldn't eat because of the guilt that I didn't have support that I desperately needed because I ate food. And if I could keep it up and not eat, then like I wouldn't be letting down my dogs. So I'm cleaning. I mean, I keep getting hurt. I have a giant bruise now on the side. I still have it because it hit me that to eat an apple, and I just look at him like, I can't eat this apple because I'll hate myself even more. I'll be like, look at you. This is why people left you. This is why people wouldn't give you $1 because if you would be so disgusting to eat this apple, and that's why they leave you. They left you. They left you. I'm just being honest about this. That's how the state of my mind has been. So I'm very much looking forward to reading to you guys. I got this. So this is where we're at with the book right here. This was what's left. That's the neighbors bring the trash up. It's trash night. So only like this much. I don't know if we're gonna read that one next. We have so much great exciting books that to read. I even got the Cher biography that John got me for Christmas. I got anyway. So, and I think that might be a lot of it similar. But this next part, like this last like that we have left, I think is going to be really good. Tonight, maybe I'll get my mind off things. I moved an entire bookshelf, like one of those like really heavy ones, just like to try to get the pain passed from my emotions to the physical experience of like moving all that stuff. I have physical therapy tomorrow actually. Because the person that left you, I left you, didn't care at all, but my back is broken in 2 places. So I have my physical therapy again, and I'll let you know how that goes. On the site, I'll take you with me. So anyway, I appreciate the people that jumped on it right away and muted that person from saying anything else more hurtful. But so between I saw you last night, cleaning in the front and taking care of the car being towed, putting in the claim with the insurance. I also put in the claim with the insurance about Fila, getting that rental to Honda. It's not, I would have loved to have gotten a pickup truck because I would have loved to see if I could try to thrift a table from the side of the road or something so I could have a kitchen table if I put it in a pickup, but they didn't have it. That's all I could get. But sorry, my stomach growling. Anyway, let's read. Hopefully this lighting will straighten out because I would put on a nice dress for you and like white heel. I'm so looking forward to my sleep schedule getting straightened out because this has been quite a mess. Let's see. But it has helped me as far as with the let me grab my pillow. Or my shark. With the house, because you know how this room has been, for example. I'm pulling you guys up. The light dims and brights right back up. Well, after buying 3 computers, would you like to buy me my next computer that doesn't do that? I'd appreciate that. Sorry here. I can try to find one. It takes a few weeks with the warranty. But it'll work out. Oh, that's glossary. All right. Throughout its life cycle, each generation's endowment efforts are concentrated in areas closely connected to its peer personality. Clearly, a generation can endow the future in any number of ways. It can build airports, establish corporations, write poetry, protect the wilderness, fight to preserve liberty, expand rights for the handicapped, fund a pension plan, or teach children how to spell. Well, hopefully, like all generations would do that, right? It can add to the accumulated stock of physical, natural, or human capital, or add to the ancestral legacy of political, artistic, and spiritual capital. But since different generations think and feel differently about life, their preference among kinds of endowment will not be uniform or random. Idealist generations do not grow up eager to turn beaches into concrete harbors, nor civic generations to found spiritual cults. No, that can't be true because I'm a civic generation, right? And I would love to found a cult. Likewise, young reactives seldom daydream about making life fail safe through flowcharts, nor do many young adaptives yearn to vanquish competitors in Top Gun dogfights. Instead, each generation concentrates on making endowments expressive of its lifelong peer personality. Reflect on the types of endowments Americans celebrate on four major national holidays. On Thanksgiving, we celebrate the spiritual values of daily life, thanks to the idealist Puritans. On July 4th, National Independence, thanks to the reactive liberty. On Memorial Day, public heroism, thanks to the civic GIs. And on Martin Luther King's birthday, cultural pluralism, thanks to the adaptive silence. Looking through the biographies of America's 18 generations, we can see that every generation makes at least some mark in every variety of endowment. But as with so much else, an important pattern emerges. Figure 12 10 summarizes how each generational type shows a special instinct and talent for certain endowment activity. As a generation matures, its endowment behavior becomes part of its peer personality, part of its self image, and its image in the eyes of elders and juniors. Just as each generation and type tends to stake out a matching endowment, agenda, so do other generations come to defer to that generation and type for providing such endowments. Over the past several decades, for example, Americans of all ages have looked to GIs for big constructions, to the silent for fairness, to boomers for reflection. Similarly, early 19th century Americans looked to Republicans for institutions, to compromisers for hard-nosed realism. Whatever its type, a generation works to achieve endowments with an intensity that varies over its life cycle. In youth, its endowment activity is virtually nil. Coming of age, it begins building a legacy by fulfilling or challenging the endowment expectations of elders. Maturing into midlife leadership, it begins to make major contributions on its own. As its first cohorts enter elderhood, typically attaining the highest leadership posts, while realizing its agenda must soon be either completed or abandoned, its activity reaches maximum intensity and then falls off. Moving beyond elderhood, right? Fila! Oh, she barking. Right around the time of the next generation of its type is entering youth, a generation typically sees its agenda neglected. Since each type of generation is pushing a certain endowment activity throughout its life cycle, this dynamic gives endowment behavior a characteristic pattern during each constellation era. Specifically, I'm curious what they say about how they qualify, quote, generational endowments. Like, for example, political things, right? Is it the politician who is that age demographic, that generation? Or is it the voters who could have been mostly of a totally different generation to say who went down? Or what about the Supreme Court? What if they're, well, yeah, they're varied generations. So just because it happens during a generational life cycle, like who do you credit that to? I mean, some things are obvious if it's a person, but okay, let's see. The endowment behavior of each constellational era reflects the new endowment activity of the generational type coming of age. The strong and rising endowment activity of the type entering midlife, the peaking then falling activity of the type entering elderhood, and the dormant activity of the type moving beyond elderhood and moving into youth. Oh, there's a thing here, a little chart they say endowment behavior by constellational era. All right, let's see modern examples. So, idealist, awakening eras, the 1970s, new 1990s, inner driven era, strong and rising, crisis era 1930s, peaking then falling, outer driven era 1950s, dormant. Okay, so those are just for different eras, but okay. So modern examples, idealist endowments are principle, I don't know what that means in this context, religion and education. An idealist then is a boomer generation. Reactive, liberty, pragmatism, and survival endowments. I'm a little lost there. Civic, so that's a millennial. Community, technology, and affluence. And then adaptive, pluralism, expertise, and social justice. Okay. Let's summarize the endowment activity of each era. An awakening era begins with civic endowment activity in confident overdrive. Society is building big things, exploring new worlds, organizing new institutions. As the moral claims of young idealists emerge, a spiritual awakening lashes out at society's secular bias, which suddenly halts and frustrates its forward motion. By the end of the era, civic progress is mired, while the fairness and process oriented endowments of the adaptive ameliorates gain favor. The old reactive focus on prudence and realism now appears stodgy and old fashioned. An inner driven era begins with adaptive endowment activity reaching high tide, pushing pluralism to the limit, infusing justice with process, and making institutions highly professional and complex. Coming of age reactives apply new survival skills to a world they find harsh. The values and morality oriented endowments of idealist moralizers gradually gain popularity. Civic endowments, now seen as gridlocked and unworkable, attract little new interest until near the end of the era. A crisis era begins with idealist endowment activity rising to maximum fury. Society now places total priority on establishing a consensus of good versus bad, right versus wrong. Sometime near the peak of the secular crisis, this fervor gives way to the sharp eyed prudential endowments of midlife reactives. The energy and teamwork of coming of age civics emerge from a new chrysalis. By now, the old adaptive sensitivity to process and pluralism is deemed a wasteful, even subversive luxury. An outer driven era begins with reactive endowment activity in great popular demand, emphasizing survival and stability, and consolidating new institutions while preserving families and tradition from encroachment. The more ambitious and collectivist endowments of the civic builders gradually gain popularity. Coming of age adaptives build expertise, tired of moral crusades. Society turns its back on idealist endowments until near the end of the era. Within any era, the most striking pattern is not so much the emergence of a new endowment activity, which is gradual, but the decline of an old activity, which is rapid. Since younger generations have grown accustomed to relying on an older generation to champion its own preferred endowment activity, they are unprepared to fill the gap when that older generation passes on. Like a table are with one leg jerked away, therefore society suffers a tilt or disequilibrium from the sudden absence of this endowment activity. The implications are clear. In each era, the most noticeable endowment neglect or reversal is likely to occur in the endowment activity associated with the generation currently passing beyond elderhood. So I think that would mean that the boomers of now, that it's going to be the most noticeable, the endowments that they give us now, whenever they're gone, or yeah. And then the next step. In a crisis era, for example, due process and fair play fall into disfavor, not only from the force of events, but also because the generation that everyone expects to defend them is disappearing. Think back to the aggressive regimentation of economic and social life during the mid 1930s, or to the mass internment of Japanese American citizens a few years later. Where were the adaptives? Where were the progressive trust busters and champions of due process? They were, by then, too old to be heard. We could ask similar questions of prior crisis eras. Where were the adaptive conciliators during the Civil War or the American Revolution? The compromisers or enlighteners were, by this time, too old or discredited. The same pattern holds for other types of eras. The culturally sterile end of ideology decade of the 1950s, an outer-driven era, could have used a few zealous idealists to stir things up, but the missionaries were disappearing. Much the same could be said for the culturally quiescent Jeffersonian era of the early 1800s, then feeling the loss of the awakeners, or the circa 1880 height of the Gilded Age, when the transcendentals were fading. The do-it-now euphoria that gripped America from the late 1960s through most of the 1970s, an awakening era, needed something very different, a splash of ice water realism. Skeptical reactives might have sobered us up and spared us disappointment later on, but it was too late. By the time of Model Cities and Woodstock, all but a few of the lost had passed from the scene. Today, America is moving into an inner-driven era. This is 1991. With adaptives adding layers of institutional process and detached idealists still perfecting new values. Whose endowment activity are we beginning to miss the most? The GIs, the only living generation that still knows how to unify the community and get big things done. Oh, thank you, Jerry. The overlapping pattern between generations and endowment behavior leads to a final life cycle observation. Each generation develops a lifelong endowment agenda pointing toward the endowment activity that society neglected or reversed during its youth. That's interesting. An agenda pointing toward the endowment activity society neglected or reversed during its youth. I'm trying to think about what endowment activity has society neglected or reversed during like my youth, the current, kids growing up, the past people's, The silent, like every earlier adaptive generation, grew up in a crisis-gripped world that had little time for refinement, sensitivity, or play-by-the-rules fairness. Their lifelong agenda has pointed toward rectifying such mistakes, toward raising again the banner dropped in old age by the progressives. It was, for example, a silent-dominated Congress that recently awarded $20,000 in damages to every Japanese American interned during World War II. Boomers, like every earlier idealist generation, grew up as children during a cyclical low tide of spiritual curiosity. Their lifelong endowment agenda points toward infusing society with new spiritual energy. Indeed, the boom is the first generation since the missionaries to show signs of preparing for late in life moral crusades. For 13ers, we should ask what they will someday sense was missing from their childhood endowment. So they're okay. Most likely, it will be something all generations have missed since the mid 1960s, the active presence of the pragmatic lost. As for the newly arriving millennials, perhaps they will grow up yearning for something Americans are about to miss, the active presence of the team playing GIs. As is the generation of leaves, wrote Homer, so it is with the generation of men which alternately come forth and pass away. Endowment behavior reflects a stabilizing dynamic intrinsic to the generational cycle, which ensures that no one dimension of progress is pushed too long or lies dormant too long. This makes like Homer's leaves, each kind of endowment activity has its own season. Like Homer's leaves, each kind of endowment this makes the cycle of generations a powerful force for rejuvenation, a balance wheel for human progress, and if all generations play their roles well, a guarantor of the American dream. The past is prologue. Let's turn to the future. Chapter 13, Completing the Millennial Cycle. History is full of sparks. Some have blazed for a moment, then died. Others have touched off conflagrations out of all proportion to the sparks themselves. Suppose authorities seriously suspected that a band of terrorists linked to a fanatically anti-American nation had smuggled a nuclear bomb into New York City. How would America respond? To answer this question, we would need to know when this event is taking place, specifically during which constellation era. Oh, let me move over. I am so looking forward to this chapter. Because I want to know what their thoughts are in 1991 about an attack happening in New York City, because we know what happens. Listen, 1991, 20 years later. No. Assuming he'll talk. Well, let's see. Okay, suppose the terrorist threat had arisen during the last awakening era, say around 1970. Well, I just want to say, have you guys heard about that? There was something vaguely in the news about, I think it was over New Jersey, like drones or something, and people were like a little freaked out, concerned. And I was just thinking, like, didn't we just have, when was it? Was it like a couple of years ago? I am telling you, like, with time, I get so, like, do you ever have this happen? Like, I buy food from, I shouldn't say just food, not like milk, but like canned food. And I'll be like, oh, this expires in like 5 years or 3 years. And so when I'm, cleaning my pantry lately, I'll be like, oh, I know this isn't expired because I just bought it. And it's like, no, this expired a year ago. Like, what? And I know because I just bought it and it had so long to go. And I'm like, what? So anyway, I don't know when this happened, but what, I don't know, was it confirmed that it was from China, but they had like a balloon. I don't know if it was like measuring weather or something in different parts of the world. But people were really concerned. I'm just saying, like, isn't that like kind of like nothing new to fly? I mean, God knows how many satellites are up there right now. You just get used to it, I guess. Wave to the satellites looking at you. Hi. Okay. I can't understand people talking about my bear when it's like, you want to see that? You know exactly where you can see that. I'm not going to say it here or post anything here. I'm not even going to say a word that even sounds like it. But the thing is, I mean, maybe I'll get like an Instagram at some point and have a way there to find it. But what I'm saying is, all you're doing is making it clear that you don't support me, and therefore you don't care if my dogs die. You don't care if I die. You don't care if I even have a computer to stream on. You don't care if I, quite frankly, quite literally can't afford to eat the way I should. I know some of you guys, you pay for like my dog food, or I'll get gift cards to go to the grocery store and stuff. But it's like, all that you're saying when you say that is, I don't support you, and just like the person that wrote me directly, I don't care if your dogs die. You know what I mean? It's like the guy when I was like, swear it on everyone that you love that you can't give me $1. Because it's like, don't lie to me. You know what I mean? How can I make this a YouTube friendly saying? Don't throw peppermint mocha lattes on my leg and tell me it's raining. Peppermint mocha. You know what I mean? Like, disrespect. Hello. Okay. But if you very much want to see whatever you're claiming you want to see, the I have to relearn how to talk, on this channel, but I'm doing a good job. I'm doing a good job. Anyway. Where was I? Okay. Almost any official response would have been intensely controversial. GI leaders in their 50s, acting as hubristic crisis managers, would have played down the threat by assuring the public that daily life need not be disturbed, while working to control the situation through vigorous technological means. Angry coming-of-age boomers would have organized behind a variety of symbolic and emotional responses, accusing the U.S. government of lying one way or the other, and blaming it all on some monstrous institutional plot. Caught in between, the 30-ish silent would have puzzled for reasons why any foreigner could hate us so much. Evacuation would have taken place in a mood of collective hysteria and disbelief. America would have been at war with itself more than with the perpetrators. Alternatively, suppose this nuclear terrorism were to happen sometime in the early 1990s. Okay, well, it didn't. In the middle of... I feel like the last nuclear... I don't know if you call it an attack, but like situation where people were harmed, that had to be Fukushima, right? And that was a tsunami. Who even knows? I mean, sometimes I'll think about it and I'll think, yes, we could go into a world war. I know I'm within range of like North Korea and things. But like, who are the nuclear superpowers? I know they have some. In some countries, they say in Europe, like they dismantle some of them, but Russia has them. I don't really think about it that much. In the middle of the current inner-driven era, by then, the span of roughly a quarter century will have entirely reshaped the likely national response, which would now stress caution, conciliation, and deferral. Silent cabinet officers would consult allies, form committees, review options, and invite full public discussion. After initiating multilateral negotiations, leaders would generally try to wait things out. The crisis would frustrate but not anger boomers who would trade philosophic remarks about how it was bound to happen sooner or later and would hardly ruffle young 13ers, many of whom might rush toward the city to sell or volunteer transportation to families wanting to leave. Official evacuation plans would be expensive and overcomplicated and would elicit little public confidence that they would work as intended. Most people would stay calm and simply make their own plans. Chances are the nation would squeeze by the immediate threat undamaged, but leave its underlying causes either unsolved or, at best, mildly ameliorated. Is this what they're saying would happen in 1990, early 1990s if there was a nuclear attack? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. They would absolutely have attacked back in the early 1990s. Yeah, sure they would help people, but there would be a full-scale, full-blown war. There's a reason it didn't happen. Finally, suppose the terrorists were to strike during the upcoming crisis constellation. Oh, here we go. Sometime around the year 2020. Once again, a quarter turn in the generational constellation would prompt a response that, from today's perspective, seems unrecognizable. Boomer leaders in their 60s would neither hide nor ponder the rumor. Instead, they would exaggerate the threat. Who said there was a bomb in only one city? And tie it to a larger sense of global crisis. Unifying the nation, well, I could see that. Unifying the nation as a community, they always do that. These leaders would define the enemy broadly and demand its total defeat, regardless of the human and economic sacrifices required. Yes, I mean, but I think again at any time they would. Um, Evacuation would be mannerly, with cooperative millennial youths seeking and accepting orders from elders, and with pragmatic midlife 13ers making sure no time is wasted. The nation would act promptly and decisively as a single organism. Mm, for better or for worse, Americans would be far more inclined than in other eras to risk catastrophe to achieve what its leaders would define as a just outcome. Here we have one hypothetical event and three hugely contrasting responses. In all likelihood, the impact on history would come less from the act of terrorism itself than from the response it would provoke. In looking ahead to the future, no one can say whether nuclear terrorism will ever strike, nor can anyone be sure about any number of troubling scenarios often mentioned in predictions about the early 21st century. The use of chemical, germ, or nuclear weapons by small nations, revolution in Latin America, belligerent third world fundamentalism, AIDS, the global warming trend, ozone depletion, exhaustion of fossil fuels, the abuse of high tech genetics. What does that mean? Trade wars, or a debt fueled financial crisis. Nobody can today predict what specific problems or events America's leaders will face in the 2010s or 2020s. Likewise, around 1745 and 1910, respectively, nobody would have predicted the Boston Tea Party or Pearl Harbor Day. I think some people did predict it because it was a major target. Um, it could have taken us out of the war. Still, less the rapid and momentous sequels to those events. When experts investigate the future, they typically rely on quantitative projections, but these same experts acknowledge Mm. That they are helpless before the great mysteries of human nature. How people will respond to those problems, how they will think, behave, and vote when energy forecasters probe the long term future of fossil fuels. For example, they seldom ask whether Americans in the 21st century will act any differently than they did during the me decade, 1970s. Implicitly, these forecasters assume people would react to another oil shortage by behaving the same way. Government with complex regulation, producers with market chaos, consumers with angry gas lines. Likewise, economists who make long term Social Security projections tend to assume that persons in pre and post retirement age brackets will maintain the same political attitudes that people in these age brackets have shown in the recent past. In other words, they assume that old silent and boomers will sustain the senior citizen benefits, lobby with the same intensity as GIs, and that younger 13ers and millennials will subsidize elder benefits as willingly as the silent and boom have in recent decades. Straight line projections like these can be way off the mark. The equivalent of forecasting how the Civil War would be waged by studying the speeches of Henry Clay. History tells us one thing for certain about social behavior: it never remains the same for long. The realistic question is not whether it will change, but how and when. This is not to say that history is invariant with predetermined outcomes. Any era can bring forward good or bad leaders, good or bad choices. What we do suggest is that constellational eras and generational life cycles follow predictable patterns within which each generation has a limited choice of scripts. During social moments, secular crisis especially, those scripts become more fateful, more determinative of history, more likely to result in triumph or tragedy. Building from the paradigms of the last chapter, we can extend these generational scripts into the future. The millennial cycle already began, as all cycles must, with one social moment, the boom awakening of the late 1960s and 1970s. The next, what we call the crisis of 2020, is due to begin when the millennial cycle has run about halfway through its course. The current cycle is still young, still unfolding. It will surely bring many surprises. Yet, with 4 centuries as a guide, we should be able to anticipate its major trends and turns. In the pages that follow, we present a generational itinerary of America's future from the 1990s through the 2060s. It is a story of hope and worry, of opportunity and danger. Each of today's generations will face the future with its own unique peer personality, its own special mission of endowment. How will they fare? Contemporary readers can speculate. Only our heirs will know for sure. Well, I guess I'm an heir because we're 30 years later and no. We're 33, 30, 34, almost 35 years later. So, completing the eras of the millennial cycle. Somehow, the past always seems nearer than the future. World War I started 8 decades ago in Europe. That's not so long ago. The year 2069 is the same distance in the future. Just the sound of that year conjures an unfathomable, even some might think irrelevant future. But the Census Bureau predicts that roughly 35 million presently living Americans will live through the 2060s, nearly 3 times more than today's 12 million surviving lost in GIs who were youngsters in 1914. History records what happened over the past 8 decades. Now, let's look at what the cycle tells us about the next 8. We start with an automatic demographic projection, reminding us how old we shall all be at 22-year intervals into the future, from 1981 until the year 2069. Figure 13-1, that'd be on the next page, starts with 1981 because that was the last cohort year of a new reactive generation, and thus marks an aligned awakening constellation. Moving forward from 1981, using 22-year multiples, we estimate that the next 4 aligned constellations will occur around 2003, inner driven, 2025, crisis. Oh, next year, great. 2047, outer driven, and 2069, awakening. Notice how in figures 13-1, the age brackets of living generations are roughly aligned with the 4 phases of life in 1981 and at all subsequent 22-year intervals. We cannot project these aligned constellations with precision, of course, for another 2 or 3 decades. We cannot even be sure whether 1981 is in fact the last 13er cohort. And beyond that, the boundary years are even less certain. Knowing that generations average 22 years in length, however, we can make reliable estimates and project future rhythms with a relatively small margin of error. Figure 13-2 displays the generational constellations in future aligned years and shows the life cycle phase of each generation alive in those years. Here we see the mix of peer personalities America can expect during each era. For the 3 generations yet to be born, we indicate their probable type. We also add a 5th life phase, post-elderhood, in recognition of the unprecedented leap in elderly life expectancy over the last half century. In 1940, men and women at age 65 were expected to live another 12 and 13 years, respectively. Today, they are expected to live another 15 and 19 years, and these numbers may rise further in the decades ahead. Recall how the endowment activity of any generation moving through elderhood crests amid controversy and then declines sharply. The growing presence of post-elders, therefore, could be an important cycle innovation, full of new opportunity and new danger. Figure 13-2 shows 2 future social moments, a secular crisis and a spiritual awakening. These moments begin and peak, though they do not always end, sometime during the era preceding an aligned awakening or crisis constellation. The cycle indicates that the period 2004 through 2025 is due to become the next crisis era. The period 2048 through 2069, the next awakening era. Applying the paradigms of Chapter 12, we can forecast how the constellational mood will shift over the next several decades. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, America has been and will remain in an inner-driven mood. On schedule, each of today's generations is maturing in a predictable direction as it begins to enter a new phase of life. The GIs are becoming energetic post-elders, the silent, sensitive elders, boomers, moralistic midlifers, and 13ers, alienated rising adults. Also on schedule, these same generations have emerged from the recent awakening feeling good about their personal lives, yet worry that this spiritual afterglow cannot thrive forever on the strength of secular endowments made in pre awakening decades. The opening years of this era, the middle to the late 1980s, ranked among the less eventful of modern American history. The national mood was calm, with values quite settled in contrast to the awakening 1970s. GI leaders stayed on as reliable caretakers at the very top of public institutions, increasingly regarded as ineffective. The silent, now filling most lesser posts from Congress and cabinets to state legislatures and corporate directorships impressed their made by committee stamp on political and economic life. Boomers, still wrapped up in young families and new careers, made their yuppie phase of political remission the subject of much wonderment. 13er youths showed early signs of economic distress and cultural alienation, and millennial babies benefited from a rekindled adult affection for infants. Most Americans worried that the country was not facing up to its long term challenges, but found it very difficult to concentrate attention on an effective response. By the decade's end, talk of a new world leader or order, a new world order, felt premature in a society unsure of its own foundations. As the 1990s dawned, the generational constellation and mood resembled those of 1910, 1845, 1750, and 1650. What will the 1990s bring? With the fading presence of GIs, public confidence in old institutions will wane even further. Elder silent leaders will discuss and debate but never rule out any perceived institutional inequity. Midlife boomers will come out of remission trumpeting moral rectitude. Coming of age 13ers will game the system without any pretense of higher principle. Meanwhile, public life will become more zealous, less friendly, social intolerance will grow, respect for privacy decrease, new values coalitions will arise, while older voting blocs based on economic, class, and racial self interest weaken. Child nurture will become stricter, and the protective function of schools and neighborhoods will attract growing public support. The senior citizen movement will weaken and the child lobby strengthen. The widening gap between haves and have nots will be increasingly recognized as a problem, and people at both ends of the economic spectrum, the intractably poor and the greedy rich, will be attacked for lacking acceptable civic virtue. Boomer retooled justice will punish aberrant behavior with growing severity and overtones of moral retribution. Boomer retooled institutions will strictly regulate conduct from drug use to parenting, formerly regarded as matters of personal choice. During the 1990s, three distinct generational cultures will emerge. At the elder end, the silent will struggle to buttress and defend their pluralist culture, an emphasis on lifestyle tolerance, economic opportunity, and process protected fairness. Mm. These efforts will peak before the mid 1990s and then decline steeply. Displacing the silent will be the boom's moralistic culture, an emphasis on ethical absolutes, community values, and accountability in public and private life. Meanwhile, 13ers will advance into rising adulthood, engaged in an alienated culture, an emphasis on getting what you can, without excuses, in a world that, as they will see it, never cared about giving them much. Well, so far, I'm going to agree on the 1990s being, because recall, very religious, more so than now. And I know that like when Bush Jr. got elected, it was through heavy work on bringing out the evangelicals, the churches, and that lobby was very powerful, more so than even now. A lot of religious books at the time, not just the Bible, but like anything with like a religious bent, like that post Columbine where the person like supposedly wouldn't denounce God, and so they killed her or something, and there are a lot of things like that. I just mean, if they're trying to predict in the 1990s a lot of moralism, yeah, I think so. I think they were right. When America reaches an aligned inner-driven constellation sometime around 2003, each generation will fully occupy a new phase of life. The surviving GIs will be very old, the silent in elderhood, boomers in midlife, 13ers in rising adulthood, and millennials in youth. The generational alignment will match the constellations of 1924, 1855, 1766, and 1673. At all four of these moments, Americans perceived their social life to be fragmenting into centrifugal and uncontrollable wildness. Boomer and 13er cultures will by then be moving into self contained camps, loud, moralizing aggressors on the older side, and atomized, pleasure seeking victims on the younger. A vindictive age polarization America has not witnessed since the Roaring Twenties. Looking down the age ladder, Elder Silent will express dismay at growing signs of tribalism, nativism, social intolerance, and just plain meanness. Boomers will voice exasperation over the ineffective leadership, however well intentioned, of their next elders, and fury at the help myself nihilism of their next juniors. Looking up, 13ers will sense among older generations an utter impracticality and inability to see the world for what it really is. As America moves into the ensuing crisis era, long deferred secular problems can be expected to reemerge with fearsome immediacy. The aging silent will participate eagerly in the new search for institutional solutions that work, while reminding their juniors, something few will then want to hear, that the solution should be fair as well. Boomers, their first wave cohorts, frowning on the golden age sales brochures beginning to arrive by mail, will turn up their moral megaphones to full blast. If ever there were a time to turn Pepperland into reality, many boomers will be thinking that time is nearing. On the brink of midlife and now beginning to tire, 13ers will sense their party boat drifting toward a waterfall and will start thinking about which way to leap and when. Millennials, busy transforming college life, will astound and delight elders with their friendly, optimistic, and team playing attitude. Moving further ahead, perhaps halfway into the crisis era, history suggests the mood will calm somewhat. Engulfed in the electric air before a storm and perhaps already buffeted by the first shock, Americans will look toward the future with a new attitude of personal realism and public determination. The sense of community will strengthen, with one set of ideals pulling most political energy into its orbit. As each generation begins to feel the full burden of its next phase of life, each will push for a new social role definition: stewardship for elder boomers, pragmatic management for midlife 13ers, teamwork for rising adult millennials, The generational cycle will approach its moment of maximum opportunity and danger. At this point, most likely late in the crisis era, some spark of history can be expected to ignite a new social moment, a secular crisis, snapping generations into these new roles. Such a crisis will give boomers a chance to thrust their awakening ideals into the core of a new national, perhaps even global order. Thirteeners a chance to redeem themselves while playing for the ultimate stakes, and millennials a chance to demonstrate civic virtue and triumph over great adversity. Meanwhile, a new generation of child adaptives, smothered by heavily protective 13er nurture, will cower at the sight of adults doing great deeds. Enter the crisis of 2020. When will this crisis come? The climactic event may not arrive exactly in the year 2020, but it won't arrive much sooner or later. A cycle is the length of 4 generations, or roughly 88 years. If we plot a half cycle ahead from the boom awakening and find the 44th anniversaries of Woodstock and the Reagan Revolution, we project a crisis lasting from 2013 to 2024. If we plot a full cycle ahead from the last secular crisis and find the 88th anniversaries of the FDR landslide and Pearl Harbor Day, we project a crisis lasting from 2020 to 2029. By either measure, the early 2020s appear fateful. How old will each generation be when the crisis arrives? On average, history tells us the crisis begins 62 years after the idealist's middle birth year and 19 years after the civic's middle birth year. It peaks 5 or 10 years later. Thus, at the peak of the crisis, the surviving silent will be in their mid 80s and beyond. The boomers in elderhood, 13ers in midlife, millennials in rising adulthood, and a new generations of adaptives and youth. What will precipitate this crisis? It could be almost anything, including incidents trumped up by a generation of elderly warrior priests gripped with visions of moral triumph. The spark that catches fire may seem accidental, but as with many past examples, the overthrow of Andros, the Boston Tea Party, Lincoln's many past examples, the overthrow of Lincoln's election and Pearl Harbor, old idealists may have a hand in stirring events to maximum political effect, mobilizing younger generations into action. I don't feel like I see any of that. How significant will the crisis be? Recall the parallel eras: the Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, the Civil War, and the years spanning the Great Depression and World War II. The crisis of 2020 will be a major turning point in American history and an adrenaline-filled moment of trial. At its climax, Americans will feel that the fate of posterity for generations to come hangs in the balance. What will the national mood be like? This crisis will be a pivotal moment in the life cycles of all generations alive at the time. The sense of community will be omnipresent. Moral order will be unquestioned, with rights and wrongs crisply defined and obeyed. Sacrifices will be asked and given. America will be implacably resolved to do what needs doing and fix what needs fixing. How will the crisis end? 3 of the 4 antecedents ended in triumph. The fourth, the Civil War, in a mixture of moral fatigue, vast human tragedy, and a weak and vengeful sense of victory. We can foresee a full range of possible outcomes, from stirring achievement to apocalyptic tragedy. What happens if the crisis comes early? What if the millennium, the year 2000 or soon thereafter, provides boomers with the occasion to impose their millennial visions on the nation and world? The generational cycle suggests that the risk of cataclysm would be very high. During the 2000 through 2009 decade, boomers will be squarely in midlife and nearing the peak of their political and institutional power. From a life cycle perspective, they will be exactly where transcendentals were when John Brown was planning his raid on Harper's Ferry. Boomers can best serve civilization by restraining themselves or by letting themselves be restrained by others until their twilight years, when their spiritual energy will find expression not in midlife leadership but in elder stewardship. Let's assume the crisis arrives on schedule around the year 2020. Once the end is in view, all generations will gaze hopefully toward the milk and honey of the post crisis world. By the year 2020, American society will settle into an outer driven era. Boomers will start moving on to the old rung, 13ers to elderhood, and millennials to midlife. New adaptives will quiescently come of age, and an indulged new crop of idealist children will command adult affections. The decade after the crisis, probably the 2030s, will be a slow moving period in American history, a time of community and family life, spiritual staleness, and benign confidence about the future. The era will be upbeat but culturally bland, reminiscent of antecedent eras around 1710, 1800, 1880, and 1955. Midlife millennials will set out on giant secular projects, while the more cautious rising adult adaptives will concentrate on smallish ameliorative agendas. By this point, circa 2000, America will be remembered as socially disorganized, wild but fun, and somewhere on the cusp of what will then be perceived as the modern era, much as the 1920s were remembered in the 1950s. After another quarter century has passed, on when 13ers are 80-ish curmudgeons and first wave millennials on the brink of elderhood, a highly secular culture will be due for resacralization. We can expect that a team playing cadre of 60-ish millennials will then provide brittle targets for a rising generation of idealist zealots. At that point, the millennial cycle will come to a close, and a new cycle will begin. Past spiritual awakenings have started, on average, about 65 years after mid cohort civic births, peaking 7 years later. This suggests the next awakening, the next era, like the late 1960s consciousness revolution, will heat up sometime in the 2050s, the next cycle moment to match the early Reagan Bush years with civic elders, adapted midlifers, idealist rising adults, and reactive youths will occur around the year 2069. The scheduled date for the next aligned awakening constellation, we stop our chronology there. With today's infants in old age, the 1980s will then be recalled as dimly as Americans today know the decade after 1900. And school history lessons will breeze through the years between 1945 and 1990, much as today's move briskly from 1865 to 1910. While every era is a drama of many actors, each generation follows its own script. Therefore, the drama is best understood when told actor by actor along the generational diagonal, completing the missionary and lost diagonals. For the roughly 1,000 missionary supercentenarians and the 1 million surviving lost, mostly in their 90s, the future holds mainly the remembrance of the past. In 1990, the oldest known American with a confirmable birth date was 112. The quiet witness borne by these scattered last wave missionaries more than 130 years after that generation's first birth year can remind others how far the lifespan of their last 112-year survivors might reach into the 2030s. Oh, hi, John. The For the GIs, the 2050s for the silent, the 2070s for the boom, the 2090s for 13ers, the 2110s for millennials. Centenarians have lately been America's fastest growing age bracket, a trend that could easily continue through the 21st century. As they live on into the 1990s, the missionaries and lost can offer other important reminders for younger generations of their same type. Boomers would do well to reflect on how missionaries changed from the brash young reformers to the stern elder Victorians, and how they transcended the zeal and self-absorption of their youth to produce greatness in old age. Similarly, 13ers can learn important lessons from the lost, how history dealt them short term excitement but longer term pain, how so many ran on empty to the point of exhaustion, how life went on and alienation passed, how at a critical hour they exercised practical realism as no other generation could, and how at life's end they became risk averse conservatives. Today's 25-year-olds today exhibit many of the tendencies of what Fitzgerald termed the pre war personality of the lost. Perhaps 13ers can aspire to match the best of what the lost became: the Nobel laureate authors, the savvy adventurers, the level headed pragmatists, with less of the impulse towards self destruction. Entering post elderhood in an inner driven era, 1991 through 20 to 2003. Physical decline will come hard to a generation whose definition of self and virtue has always been so closely tied to activity, to getting things done. Many GIs will feel newly depressed, finding a loss of purpose, sensing a loss of respect. Yet the core of this generation will try, as always, to keep spirits up. Many of those in failing health will move from seniors only condos into member run planned care communities. Euphemized updates of what the lost bluntly called nursing homes. Wherever GIs live, their peer society will remain as friendly and collegial as ever. The mutually supportive relationship between government and GIs will continue into the latter's deep old age. Over the next 15 years, public attention to the needs of senior citizens will shift up the age bracket, away from issues that not long ago were on the minds of 60-year-olds: early retirement, reduced income, and property taxes, and toward those of concern to 80-year-olds: long term custodial care, access to life extending technologies. The GI lobbies will make the case, with silent support and boom acquiescence, that their generation is entitled to the best available health care, regardless of income or, more important, age. Like the glorious Republicans before them, GIs will expect to be treated well, and their juniors will generally comply with any request involving material reward. And, as has always been the case with GI benefits, the long term cost will be initially underestimated. With the GIs alone Atop the age ladder, however, this please thank you relationship with government will take an unfamiliar turn. 40 years ago, everyone understood that giving this generation public rewards for public deeds was a form of future oriented investment. These young GIs were the future. When they prospered, America prospered. And their idealist and reactive neighbors, missionary and lost, looked on with approval. Even though they shared less in the public largesse, during the 1990s, as GIs continued to get rewards, their idealist and reactive neighbors, Boom and 13th, will again look on with little objection and will again neither receive nor expect to receive like treatment. Yet there is one obvious difference. The GIs will no longer be the future. The generations looking on with noses pressed against the glass will not be older but younger. The GI self perception will not change at all. They will still see themselves as nice kids getting a public allowance for good deeds, but the same behavior that two life phases ago in an outer driven era had the feel of investment will now in an inner driven era have the feel of consumption. GIs did not expect their life cycle story to turn out this way. From the moment they first came of age, they followed their elders' instructions to save, invest, build, and be patient, pursuant to a Social Security deal through which GIs would be rewarded later in their life cycle by younger and presumably wealthier generations. Through the post war boom, everyone assumed that these juniors would be able to afford the burden with little trouble, thanks to an expanding workforce, rising levels of savings and investment, and heady rates of productivity growth. Benefit levels kept rising, enabling GIs to receive back many times what they and their employers had paid into the trust funds. GIs assumed their children and grandchildren would later enjoy the same pyramiding benefits when their own turns came. But something happened along the way, sapped by deficits, inflation, and a pro consumption tax bias. Savings rates did not rise, they fell. Productivity growth did not speed up, it slowed down. Younger generations did not have larger families, they had smaller ones. Moreover, the public cost of supporting GI elders soared beyond all earlier projections, thanks to a mixture of automatic cost of living hikes, earlier retirement, greater longevity, healthcare, inflation, and the GI's own political muscle. In time, the cost began crowding out most other public resource priorities. The result, through the 1980s, generational transfer payments undermined the youth focused investment activity that GIs undertook earlier in their life cycle and ushered in a historic reversal of phase of life income patterns. From progressives to missionaries to lost, every elder generation, the GIs knew earlier in life had accepted in old age lower per capita incomes and higher, typically much higher poverty rates than generations in youth or rising adulthood. The GIs, by contrast, became America's first generation of elders whose per capita income after taxes exceeds the average for all younger people. Today, when all income transfers are considered, America has 10 times more 13ers and millennials than GIs living below the poverty line. Even so, the federal government currently spends 10 times more per GI than it does per 13er and millennial child. When the GIs were young, by contrast, elder missionaries used government to direct resources in exactly the opposite direction, away from elders and toward youth. What went wrong and when? The typical GI answer bears the bruises of their old generational battle with the boom and shows a clear parallel to the old Republican transcendental quarrels of the early 19th century. Many GIs charge that boomers have betrayed history, much as the aging Jefferson blamed the young in the 1820s and Albert Gallatin blamed the young in the 1830s and 1840s. What went wrong in the GI view is that America's recent crop of rising adults have lacked the civic virtues GIs possessed in their own youth. From the crumbling apartments of Pruitt Eco to the debt leveraged buyouts on Wall Street, boomers have always seemed to grind down more than build, to care about self more than community, about consuming more than saving, about preserving personal independence more than working hard or building families. When things went wrong, again in the GI view, was during the late 1960s and 1970s. True enough, in their coming of age euphoria, boomers detested the material creations of their GI elders and castigated the very concept of deferring current consumption for the sake of future rewards, a concept boomers considered to be a central pathology of their elders' mindset. Yet this boom awakening clouded the GI judgment as well by subtly egging on their sense of worldly hubris. In effect, boomers told the GIs, "You've made material life effortless, so why bother working at it?" And GIs answered, "You're right, we have done rather well. Maybe it is time to let go." And so they did. Much rested on this acquiescence. Despite their 1960s era criticisms, the boom and silent have always depended on the GIs, the generation that, in their eyes, has always epitomized secular endowment to defend the ethic of investment. When the GIs indicated it was okay to feed off the future, other generations accepted that decision from the ones who ought to know. From the early 1970s forward, roughly halfway through the GI tenure of political leadership, the America initiated a fundamental shift in its allocations of resources from the future to the present, from investment to consumption, from young to old. GIs have benefited personally from this shift, while 13ers and possibly millennials stand to bear its biggest cost. Today's seniors can rest easy on two counts. First, no younger generation will ever take away a significant part of their retirement deal against GI opposition. Whenever GIs claim that their public and private affluence belongs to them because they earned it, they will encounter little dissent from the generation that could challenge them, the boom. Yes, boomers will think you did earn it, and like a Jeffersonian independent nation generation, you have the right to take it all with you. Boomers are willing to shell out high Social Security taxes with little expectation they will get the money back, because they themselves gain something immaterial in return: personal independence from their parents and the ability to redefine social values without interference from politically powerful elders. Second, the GIs can take some solace in recognizing that they are not the first generation to see their own unique endowment type erode upon moving behind elderhood. That happens to all generations. If the Great Society plan for a well ordered cornucopia now seems out of reach, GIs can nonetheless be proud that much of what they built still endures. Most of all, as the 1990s progress, GIs will notice younger generations start to miss their old civic magic for making things work and start to see the GI peer personality, something America badly needs to relearn. Generational monuments like Iwo Jima, once symbols of intimidating GI power, will become shrines to a civic spirit remembered, but increasingly perceived as weak and endangered. Where people of all ages will look to boomers for values, they will still, boom included, look to GIs for guidance on secular endowments, deep into the latter's old age. Thanks to lengthening lifespans, A significant number of GIs will live to see this, and many will be heartened by it. If these post elders decide to help America rekindle a sense of teamwork and productive community, then younger generations are likely to follow. If GIs themselves suggest that their wealthiest members deserve no health or nursing care subsidies, or that rank and file seniors deserve no discounts below what harder pressed 13ers must pay in full for everything from property taxes to bus rides, their example may encourage a new generation of children to start acting as selflessly as GIs themselves did in youth. If GIs themselves support additional investment in education, Boom and 13er parents may join them in putting the needs of children ahead of their own. If GIs stop tolerating trade and budget deficits that are, by simple arithmetic, elder favoring, younger voters may well agree that yes, we really should stop burdening children with debts. Will GIs relax their collective expectation of late in life reward? History says they will not. By the standards of their respective centuries, glorious and Republican elders died relatively wealthy, but culturally isolated and unhappy about their heirs, how their heirs were managing public affairs. Yet history has one blind spot. Neither of these civic predecessors had the GI's opportunity as the first set of powerful post elders in American history to reach all the way across the cycle and help raise a new civic generation. In the 1990s, the GIs will have this chance with the millennials. The power of this GI millennial bond is the major question mark in the remainder of the GI life cycle and offers the most likely catalyst for a late in life repair of senior citizen endowment behavior. GIs know through their own experience that civic generations need a positive relationship with government, starting with childhood. GIs, like boomers, were able to ignore rising poverty among 13 children, but also like boomers, they may find millennial poverty far less tolerable. Raising the millennials is mainly the task of boomers, of course, and this will complicate the GI's task of helping these children. Today's seniors will never feel comfortable with the boomer personality, nor the boom with the GI personality. But as the 1990s progress, both generations may begin to realize that much of this antagonism was heretofore rested on their respective phase of life positions. Younger idealists and older civics collectively repel each other, but older idealists and younger civics just as strongly attract each other. In post elderhood, therefore, GIs can make an important discovery about their children that boomers in midlife are coming to resemble the GI's own parents, the righteous missionaries whose patriarchal persona today's seniors remember so admiringly. GIs know they raised boomers differently from the way they themselves were brought up. Nonetheless, they expected boomer yuppies to behave as dutifully and collegially as they themselves had in 1930s and 1940s. Instead, the tempestuous boomers followed the missionary led path through rising adulthood, a phase of life during which GIs knew their parents only through a child's undiscerning eye. As custodians of the memory of great missionary leaders, GI seniors may come to see in boomers not the embodiment of civic type virtues, but the factory of those virtues. The more GIs notice this, the less they may feel inclined to opt out of the world of younger generations or to deplete any more of the endowments they worked so hard for so many decades to build. In return, boomers may see in GI post elders a living example of the competence and power they envision for their cherished millennial children. This could prove to be a mutually pleasing finale to the still simmering GI boom rift, much as the midlife awakener Benjamin Franklin finally grew to respect the do-good memory of glorious Cotton Mather, the very symbol of civic order that Franklin had ridiculed as a young man. Time and their 20th century is running out on this generation. Yet, at this writing, GI Commander in Chief still sits in the Oval Office, and millions of George Bush's peers enjoy a life as healthy and energetic as his. These senior citizens remain politically powerful out of proportion to their numbers and have ample time left to make an important choice between two currencies of elderhood. Were GIs to relinquish some of their claims to secular reward, they might redeem a greater measure of the inner reward available to the elders they knew in their own youth. The confidence that in their final years they are doing what they can to endow their heirs with a better world. No generation of younger Americans will dare force this trade off on the GIs. It is a decision only they can make. Well, they have the silent diagonal. There, I want to see, of course, guilt, capacity to see droughts. I want to see we got 2004 to 2025 boom diagonal. 21 completing during elderhood awakening 2048 Here we go. Found it. The millennial youth culture will be more clean-cut and homogeneous than any since that of the circa 1930s GIs. By the first decade of the 21st century, schools will at last be fully computer equipped, and the learning style of students will shift from an MTV-ish parallel thinking back to a more logical serial thinking. Where boomers and 13ers had once seen computers as a force for social individuation, millennials will see them as a force for social homogenization. Teen peer leaders will express a growing interest in community affairs and a growing enthusiasm for collective action. Under the boom regime of get tough laws and no kidding moral standards, teen pathologies, truancy, substance abuse, crime, suicide, unwed pregnancy will all decline. Adults will welcome a change in teen sex, which will become less matter-of-fact and starkly physical, more romantic and friendly. These trends will be apparent not just in affluent suburbs, but also in inner cities where peer-pressured boys will show more responsibility toward their sexual and parental relationships. Teen music will become more ballad-like, wholesome, and singable, with top tunes appealing to all generations. To millennial ears, on the other hand, 13er music will sound chaotic, and old boomer classics will sound oddly ethereal and unpleasantly androgynous. From music to fashion to cinema, the adolescent culture will accentuate, even celebrate sexual distinctions. When the first millennials come of age in the early 21st century, 13ers will begin mellowing, just in time for these young civics to develop positive impression of the reactive peer personality. The GI recollection of their 1920s era fun-loving lost and strict missionary teachers offers an illustration of what many lie in store, or what may lie in store. Where millennials will respect boomers as beacons for the should do's of life, they will rely on 13ers as avuncular guides to the want to do millennials. Will see their next elders as daring, puckish, and full of mischief. In return, 13ers will see these kids as extremely smart but naive, a bit too optimistic for their own good, and in need of a lesson or two about real life. College age millennials will be fascinated by 13ers' cultural trends, occasionally joining in 13er naughtiness, but will try to do so discreetly so as not to disappoint the higher boomer standard. Later, 13ers will show a continuing kindness toward a younger generation, getting a better deal out of life, though maybe a bit less fun than they ever got at the same age. While still in their youth, millennials will be called upon to perform civic deeds. Community institutions, schools, libraries, churches, police will become increasingly important in a child's life. Scout programs will be revitalized and increasingly important in a child's life, or revitalize the new ones formed. Boomers will prod millennial adolescents to spend more time studying, practicing, and organizing with some socially useful purpose in view. By law and family fiat, teen employment will be sharply curtailed. Child television viewing will decline. And what programs millennials do watch will be sanitized and laden with moral lessons. Universities provide new government aided forms of tuition finance linked to the performance of public service before, during, or after college. Around the year 2000, a wave of very different freshmen will descend on America's campuses, showing a great talent for student politics, for athletic teamwork, and in the classroom for math and science. Through adolescence, millennials will look upon government as a more benign and reliable means of providing for their age bracket than a helter-skelter mandatory national service, or wait, then, yeah, then a helter-skelter national marketplace increasingly shaped by 13ers. A boom enacted program of mandatory national service will put millions of youths in uniforms, a compulsion millennials will not mind nearly as much as boomers did at a like age. Instead, they will see it in the opportunity to prove their civic virtue and earn public adulation. Whatever practical agendas come their way, millennials will figure out a solution, organize, cooperate, share burdens, and get the job done, all with an effectiveness and cheerfulness that will stun their elders for all their excellence. The first millennials to come of age will also seem a bit bland. They won't waste their time reflecting on values or following spiritual impulses, nor will boomers ask them to do so. Aging boomers will gradually realize their style of nurture is producing better doers than feelers, better rationalists than spiritualists. In short, these kids will bear an eerie resemblance to the GIs against whom boomers rebelled in the late 1960s. But that likeness won't bother most boom midlifers, who will see in millennials precisely what the country needs to overcome adversity. Like the old awakeners who loved their Republican kids, While lamenting the liberty, boomers will develop far better lifelong friendships with millennials than with their teeners. Indeed, the relationships between older idealists and younger civics have ranked among the warmest intergenerational bonds in American history. Entering rising adulthood in a crisis era, 2004 to 2025. Early in the crisis era, rising adult millennials, especially the first wave, will encounter economic and social hardship. Unlike their teeners, however, they will emerge undaunted, thanks to their patience, confidence, and powerful instinct for community. Around the time their last wave is reaching its late teens, a secular crisis will peak, just as it did for the glorious Republicans and GIs. This cathartic moment will seal the millennials as a generation, distinguishing them forever from midlife 13ers and younger adaptives. And fixing their cohort boundaries. For now, we locate the former boundary between 1981 and 1982 cohorts and the later between the 2003 and 2004 cohorts. Both locations are estimates. Most likely, we will have to wait another 4 decades before drawing the millennial end year with any precision. Just as in 1910, we would have had to wait until the late 1940s to draw it for the GIs. The millennials' civic peer personality is not preordained. If the crisis comes too soon or worse, unfolds badly, the millennials will mirror the progressives, idealist elders. But if the crisis allows the millennials to coalesce as a genuine civic type, this generation will show more team like spirit and more like mindedness in action than most Americans then alive will recall ever having seen in young people. Before the crisis, many millennials may be attracted to global ideologies that promise material utopias through collective action. As the nation unifies, new voters will coalesce politically and may produce an electoral landslide, perhaps even a sudden party realignment that will strengthen the mandate of aging boom leaders. Elderly boomers will see this generation an effective instrument for saving the world. Having themselves screamed against duty and discipline when young, boomers will now demand duty and discipline from post adolescents. They will get both. In return, old boomers, joined by midlife 13ers, will shower youthful heroes and heroines with praise and reward. Inevitably, rising millennials will start feeling the intoxication of hubris. They will resist elders, boomers included, whom they perceive as unwilling to relinquish private and material privilege. Just as young Republicans muzzled the Tory awakeners and young GIs voted the laissez faire missionaries out of office, so too will millennials rise up against whomever they perceive to be enemies of community solidarity and public action. Millennials will carry out whatever crisis mission they are assigned as long as they can connect it with their own secular blueprint for progress. If crisis brings war, soldiers will obey orders without complaint. If it involves environmental danger or natural resource depletion, young scientists will make historic breakthroughs. If the crisis is mostly economic, the youthful labor force will be a mighty engine of renewed American prosperity. Whatever their elder bestowed mission, the rising youths will not disappoint. Assuming the crisis turns out well, millennials will be forever honored as a generation of civic achievers. But it's just creepy because this is getting into like the future, just a couple pages, and then it's this one. Okay. So just 2 pages, and then We'll be done with this book and we'll begin a new book tomorrow. Entering midlife in an outer-driven era, 2026 to 2047. When the crisis is past and a new outer-driven era is dawning, the age bias of public institutions will tilt far, perhaps too far, in the direction of millennials, a generation that people of all ages will by then equate with investment in the long-term future. Much as government tilted in favor of Republicans in the 1790s and GIs in the late 1940s. In politics, as a sense of national community builds, millennial voters may well congeal into an end of ideology generation whose political parties will show little difference in style. Meanwhile, they will take steps to solidify their pure conformity by unmasking radicals who embrace the wrong ism in their eager youth. Oh God, that's like, okay. The early 21st century equivalent of Republican Jacobinism or GI communism. The political culture of 40-ish millennials in the 2030s will be highly conformist. Only team players will be invited. By manner more than conviction, millennials will construct a circa 2030 national mood reminiscent of the post-World War II American high. Rising leaders will feel an obligation to complete the unfinished agenda of revered boom elders. Institutions will strengthen, construction will boom, and American society will substantially change its outward appearance. In churches, ministers will emphasize social fellowship over spiritual self-discovery. In universities, brilliant minds will feel in godlike control over nature. Scientists will design and taxpayers will fund grand projects that glorify the thinker, doer, builder. Right stuff millennials will command, and younger technicians will co-pilot manned space flights to the nearest planets. Midlife parents and their children, with old-fashioned 13ers looking on, will perceive themselves as distinctly modern. The days of V8 engines and vacuum tubes will seem quaint in the 2030s, as the days of steam turbines and telegraph lines did in the 1950s. Like earlier civic generations, 50-ish millennials will feel most comfortable with widely separated sex roles. They may begin to view the assertive moral posturing of very old idealist women as anachronistic and look upon the suspicious self-sufficiency of aging 13er women as antisocial and possibly dangerous. To the chagrin of old feminists, millennials will exalt the masculine and criticize the feminine influence on public life, and do the reverse in private life. This resurgent sexism will limit the life options of rising adaptive women, thereby planting the seeds of a mid-21st century feminist renaissance. Thanks to the millennial team orientation, ethnic loyalties will weaken relative to the sense of national community. Applying the circa 1990 definition, this is far and away the most minority generation in American history. But by the middle of the 21st century, the very word minority will have an odd ring to a generation more inclined to homogenize than pluralize. Racial integration will again be a public goal. This will give historic opportunity for millennial Blacks and Hispanics to achieve a far greater measure of social and political equality than their silent grandparents ever knew. As millennials try to rid the nation of racial and ethnic distinctions, however, they will be opposed by rising adaptives who will see advantage in preserving pluralism. Entering elderhood in an awakening era, 2048 to 2069. Sometime in the 2040s, vigorous veterans in their 50s may well march down Pennsylvania Avenue, accompanied by parade floats carrying their instruments of valor. They will celebrate the inauguration of America's first millennial president. The message to other generations will be much the same as it was back in 1961, the arrival in power of a great and heroic civic generation. Watching from the sidelines will be a new and probably boom crop of kids, raised indulgently and scientifically by millennial moms and dads. These kids will notice something a bit stale, a bit unreflective in the Veterans Parade. Beyond that, watch out. Within a few years, just as busy millennials are undertaking their grandest ever projects, the fury of youth will erupt. By the 2050s, 60-ish millennials can expect to find themselves on the wrong side of a two-apart generation gap, reminiscent of the late 1960s. They will think back on what good children they were back in the 1990s and puzzle over why their children cannot afford them the same respect they once showed their own boom parents. After the fires of a new awakening have cooled, and after a series of outer world disappointments, millennials will retreat together into a comfortable old age, wondering with each other if their lifetime constructions can survive a rising generation of narcissists. As a Bush like president stages his generation's final inaugural, this could happen on January 20th, 2069. Old millennial heroes, by now in their 70s, will march down Pennsylvania Avenue for the last time. The next president will come to power knowing about the crisis of 2020 only through a child's eye or from film clips. When that happens, Americans of all ages will feel something missing. By our present day capacity to reckon the future, the millennial generation will have an unfathomably long reach. Perhaps a million will live to see the 22nd century. Some will be around to celebrate the arrival of babies who will live into the 23rd century. Babies who will grow up looking upon John Kennedy as distantly as Kennedy looked upon Thomas Jefferson. Those of us born in a year that will then seem ancient in 1910, 1930, 1950, or 1970 can hardly imagine what world these future children might inherit and what world they might pass on in their turn. We can only guess at the great wonders they will see, the great deeds they will accomplish, and the great truths they will grasp. They too will play their role in the drama of American generations. It has been a vast and magnificent pageant with so many acts and so many actors since John Winthrop first felt the hand of God, yet surely one with even more acts and actors yet to come. Whoa, what did you think of that? Let me turn. Whoa. What the heck is that? Something in Chinese there. Well, I certainly think that it got the please don't be AOC. What? When it said about the conformists, I totally see that. Cause and like following the doctrine, following the societal belief systems that we are to follow. And if they are questioned, I do feel millennials particularly do get quite a bee in their bonnet over such things. As far as the other things, I don't know. I mean, of course, you can predict they'll be a powerful generation because there's so many of them. But what they talk about the crisis, see, again, I do like I had some opinions at first, but then now my thinking is like, you know what? You need to give it time. I don't often go in my mail, but I went in my mail the other day to clear things out. And there was actually a story from like Apple, or there was like an old story, and you'll know why in a second. And it was, let me look up this word. Yeah, permanent. Existing perpetually. Why does this happen? It'll get fixed. Everlasting, especially without significant change. Synonyms: constant, invariable, stable, like permanent. Um, yeah, forever. Anyway, it said the this old news thing that was it was an email from Apple, I think, was that Donald Trump has been permanently banned from Twitter. Which I thought was interesting since isn't he like friends with that Musk guy or whatever? It's weird because I read the Musk biography to you guys last year when it came out. Well, you guys, if you're anyway. Um, and he didn't like Trump at all. So it's weird, but but there you go, right? How things change, and back and forth. You could hate him by next year already, and it could be like who knows. So what I mean is I have thoughts about what happened and how this supposed crisis of 2020, and you could say maybe like the last several years or whatever. But I can't say like okay, like I'll just share some of it. I'm trying to think in terms of specific words in the book about how things were going to be handled. Um, okay, so I don't actually believe that our society, the book is like American centric, so in America, I don't actually believe that we stepped up at all. And this is so annoying. Like, do I have a feather? So, you know, this is a date night. Is that helping at all? I don't think so. If I held that. Hi. Do you like feathers? So here's an example. The national debt, because they mentioned it in the book, had gone up so much, and it was both parties, and therefore voted by people of all ages. So everybody can take credit for this. Went up so much, and so much of that public money was when you talk about in the 1940s. You know, you talk about women having to draw on their nylons, and everybody sacrifices, and you pitch in, and you know the Ford plants taken over to make tanks, and the like for the cause for the war effort. You know, whereas in America during the effort in a time of crisis, quite clearly, and it wasn't just America because I believe in California they've shown billions of dollars in fake unemployment benefits was given to gangs in Latin America, China, different places. So, but also in America, like there, so many people that follow me didn't even get the $1,000 check. Like, you know, people get blamed as though it's like, oh, they for their stimulus checks. So many people, and it makes me upset. It makes me feel so sad. Like they didn't even get that. Whereas you can find like all these like millionaires, they're just people in Congress, people in that are celebrities. Like who is that lady? That Rachel Hollis, that chick. That sorry, this is so annoying. Is that maybe if I'm closer? Hi. Um, billions, like not billions of dollar company, millions of dollar company. What I mean to say is, I look at this crisis time and say, what have we done? You know, there were people that showed extreme cowardice, extreme greed, extreme lack of consideration for the future in some ways, but that I could be wrong. It could be maybe it was the right choice. I mean, I don't see how giving billions of dollars to overseas gangs to how that could be the right choice. But what I mean to say is maybe in some way I am wrong and it will work out on some level to be for the best. And making a judgment now, was this right? Was this wrong? I mean, I do know that Thomas Massey, when one of those bills were passed, came out on the steps of Congress and said, "No, I didn't vote for this. This is going to cause inflation. This is absolutely going to cause inflation." And everyone was like, "Shut up." And it did. And so I just mean that because people said that he was wrong and he was um, fear mongering and that's not going to happen, and because they said that and they voted for it, as opposed to saying, "I'm voting for this and it will cause that, but it's for the best. It's the right thing." It's, you know what I mean? It makes me think, oh, did did some of our leaders not know what was coming and therefore look out because what's coming then, you know? So I guess what I mean is, if they want to talk about in the future how we would handle a crisis during that time, I think maybe the jury is still out. And um, so, because who knows? What's permanent, right? Trump's permanently banned for Twitter. Meanwhile, Elon Musk has a doji thing in the White House, whatever that is. So, who knows? Like maybe in some way, like in some God's plan, um, I was told I'd never be partner. Anyway, um, I'm trying to remember any other predictions. Yeah, as far as enlisting millennials, I mean, I know like there was enlistments in war, but there wasn't a draft, and you know, so they volunteered, but it wasn't anything like Vietnam or in Afghanistan. Um, Let me see your thoughts. We, our generation, couldn't do as much as previous because the older people are staying in power for a lot longer, so we can't take over yet. Well, but you vote, collectively, and we have power in our own way. But yeah, and that's the other thing, the inequality, because since those years, recent years, the inequality has gotten so much worse, and that's the thing that has been, when they were saying in by the early 1990s, that's going to be something that bothers people more. Well, I'm sorry, this is like 35 years later and it's worse than it ever was. So what are you doing? Doges is great. Wait and see. Millennials came into adulthood when the financial crisis was happening, making it extremely difficult to buy homes. That counts as a crisis prediction, I think. Oh, sure. When they say in the crisis period, the what was it, 2000, 2003, 2020? Like, I feel like the turn of the century, it's marked by 2001, thousands of people dying in a terrorist attack in the biggest city in the world, and years of not just war, but war spending. And um and then all the little moves it took to create that storm of the financial crisis, but with deregulation and with predatory, with loans, with preying on people for things, the um predatory student loans. um I think, yes, crisis, but also, when has that ended? Maybe they're going to build, isn't that what happened? I don't know if it was the New Deal, but where they built roads, built infrastructure. Why can't, maybe to build um homes, if the millennials want to get on board, right? How about environmentally friendly, what do they call it? What would my uh millennial cohort call it, sustainable, uh, have you ever seen the, uh, the Curse with Emma Stone and her house that she makes in it? You gotta watch it. So oh, that reminds me, there's something I wanna watch on Netflix. Is it a docu-series? What's it called? What's it called? Because I don't know if any of you guys seen it. Uh, I'm trying to see if I can pull it up. The Kings of Tupelo. Supposed to be good. I don't know what it's about. The Kings of Tupelo. You want to watch that with me tonight? The Mirror has, yeah. Vegans, yeah. Yeah, they have a little garden for vegetables, and they'll be like sustainably run, and you'll build these houses, and then maybe you'll even get like tax credit to get into the house because it's like, you know, millennials could do some good, but they're a little, I think they're, this new generation is so, um, because they talk about, millennials and like scientifically driven, but there's a woman in England, um, she looks a lot older, but I think she's probably Gen Z. Um, she uses her body as like a human petri dish so that anything can get in, any vector into the body from any person's, because like people can carry like um billions and various like a bacteria, virus, they like, and allowing themselves to be used for a scientific project like that. I mean, when have you done anything like that? When have you allowed hundreds of people to do something like that to you? And that's an, although in the UK, um they kind of have to do that because the taxes are so high, isn't it? Like, so people complain about that Ozempic or whatever in America being so expensive, which I'm not taking. I just want to say I have nothing to help my appetite. I can literally constantly hear my stomach growling. But they say like, how come it's so expensive here and not there? But like also there, they're paying, like, I see people will say like, oh, I have to get it through a different service because even though I can afford it, it's cheaper in the UK. Yes, but they have to pay so much taxes in the UK that this person has to have 101 people. Like, what word can you use in YouTube? Um, just to get by, just to make, well, after take home like $3,000, but then, and you know that she needs the that healthcare. It works out similarly overall. Well, sure. This lady has nice kneecaps. What? Yes. You know what I do? I have a special um treatment every night as I watch shitty reality TV or whatever. I rub lotion while I count to 1,000 and I say my prayers, and yeah, keeps it nice and smooth. Kneecaps. Who even notices kneecaps? What about the back of this earlobe? You haven't commented on that. What about my 346th hair in the back? I believe it is this one. You haven't commented on this hair yet. I don't feel like I've been analyzed and inspected enough. It's a routine. Sure. So expect a saluti, a Christmas outfit pictures coming and stuff on OF. or I mean, but is it on? Oh, friends. I don't even have a link here, so I don't need to worry about it. But what I mean is, dating will be fun. I'm really looking forward to call-in show. I have so much fun new games, and I've not gotten to do a call-in show for weeks now, and I can't wait to do one here. I cannot wait. So that'd be the day after tomorrow, because tomorrow is Thursday, and I hate that physical therapy, but I have physical therapy. It's only usually like half an hour, but so I got to get up early for that because that's in the afternoon. I can't sleep all day. Anyway, let's do it. Let's do for those on my page, the Kings of Tupelo. I love you.